Many people have a simple idea about why the Austro-Hungarian Empire ended. They often say it was because the empire was losing a big war at the end. They also say it was because the empire had too many different groups of people living inside its borders. These people spoke different languages and had different cultures. The idea is that these groups simply wanted their own countries, and so they left the empire. However, this explanation is too simple. It does not show the whole picture. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had always had many different ethnic groups living together for hundreds of years, and the empire had lost several wars before in its history. But the empire did not break apart on those earlier occasions. So these two things, losing a war and having many different groups, are not the only reasons for the end of the empire. We can also look at the countries that were created after the empire ended. Some of these new countries, like Czechoslovakia or the country that later became Yugoslavia, also had many different ethnic groups. Yet these countries stayed together for many decades. Even today, countries around the world like Belgium, Spain, or the United States of America have many different groups of people. These countries have also faced challenges, including losing wars. But they continue to exist. This shows that having different ethnic groups or facing defeat in war does not automatically cause a country to fall apart. Therefore, the collapse of Austria-Hungary was a much more complicated event. In this book, we want to tell a more complete and detailed history. We will explore how the Austrian Empire became the powerful Austro-Hungarian Empire. We will look at its strengths and how it managed its many peoples for a long time. Then we will study the different reasons and events that led to its final end. The goal is to give you a better understanding of this important part of European history from its rise to its fall. We will start at the beginning before Austria-Hungary existed. 2. How it all began. The country we talk about now is the Austrian Empire, which came before Austria-Hungary. Life for many people in this empire was difficult because of a system called serfdom. Under serfdom, a person was tied to the land and the noble who owned it. These people, called serfs, had very few freedoms. They worked hard on the land, growing food and making things, but they had to give most of what they produced to their noble ruler. They could not easily leave the land, and the noble made many decisions about their lives. In simple terms, it was a form of forced labor, almost like slavery in some ways, but it was how society was organized in many places for a long time. By the 1800s, many European countries had ended serfdom, as ideas about freedom and rights became more common. However, the Austrian Empire was one of the last major powers in Europe to still have this system in place. In the year 1848, big changes shook Europe. This year is famous for many revolutions. Across the continent, from France to the German states, people rose up to demand more rights, constitutions, and sometimes to remove kings or emperors. People wanted a say in their government and better living conditions. The waves of revolution reached the Austrian Empire. People in many parts of the empire also started to protest. They wanted basic human rights and reforms. A key demand was the end of serfdom. People wanted to be free from being tied to the land and forced to work for nobles. In the territory of Hungary, part of the empire, The protests grew into a full revolution in 1848. The Hungarian people, led by important figures, wanted more freedom and control over their own affairs. They did not want to be ruled directly by the Austrian government in Vienna anymore. They wanted their own parliament and government to make laws for Hungary. However, they did not wish to completely break away from the empire or the ruling family. Their goal was to have self-governance for Hungary while still having the Austrian emperor as their shared monarch, the king for Hungary and emperor for Austria. This was a complex idea, independence within the empire with the same ruler. The government of the Austrian Empire saw this as a major threat. Losing Hungary, a large and important part of the empire, was not an option they considered. So the Austrian army was sent to stop the revolution in Hungary. After hard fighting, the Hungarian uprising was suppressed. With help from another power, the Austrian forces defeated the Hungarian Revolutionary Army. But ending the revolution by force did not solve the underlying problems. The Hungarian people did not receive the significant rights and self-governance they had demanded. The main issues that led to the revolution remained. This left a situation where many people in Hungary were unhappy with their position in the empire, and the tension between Hungarian desires and Austrian control continued. The events of 1848 showed that the old ways of ruling were under pressure, and that the relationship between Austria and Hungary needed to change for the empire to have a stable future. 3. A time of trouble. After the time of revolutions around 1848, the Austrian Empire had new problems. The empire fought wars, but it did not win. In 1859, Austria fought a war in Italy. Austria lost this war and had to give some land to Italy. This made the empire weaker. Then, in 1866, Austria fought another war. This time, the enemy was Prussia. Prussia was a strong state in the north of Germany. For many years, Austria was the most important German state. Other smaller German states looked to Austria for leadership. But when Austria lost the war against Prussia, this changed. The German states started to look at Prussia as the main power. Austria was no longer the leader among them. Losing these wars made the Austrian Empire look less powerful in Europe. Inside the empire, people saw this. Many people from different groups lived in Austria. They started to ask questions. Why should they stay part of an empire that lost wars? They were sent to fight, but the empire did not win. People were unhappy. Also, other countries in Europe were changing fast. Countries like Great Britain and France were building many factories and becoming rich from industry. The Austrian Empire was slower to build factories. It was falling behind the other big countries. It was not becoming an industrial power as quickly as others. The leaders of the Austrian Empire saw these issues. They knew their power outside the empire was getting smaller. They saw the problems and the unhappiness inside the empire. They knew the empire needed to change. They could not get stronger by taking land from other countries anymore. That did not work. Instead, they had to look inside their own borders. To stay a big and important country, Austria needed to fix the problems with the different groups of people living in the empire. The Hungarians were a very large group, and there were still problems after the events of 1848. The leaders thought that solving the problems inside the empire, especially with the Hungarians, was the only way to make Austria strong again. 4. Two countries, one ruler. After losing wars, the Austrian Empire was weaker. Its power outside the country was less. Inside, some people did not want to be part of the empire anymore. It looked like there might be another war inside the country. The leaders in Austria saw this. They knew they needed to make changes. Spending a lot of money on the army meant they could not spend that money on their own country. This meant Austria was falling behind other countries in Europe. So the Austrian leaders decided to look inside the country for a solution. The biggest group of people who were not happy were the Hungarians. They had a revolution in 1848. After that, their problems were not solved. The Hungarian leaders wanted more power in Hungary. They wanted their own parliament and their own police. They wanted to make decisions about their own land. They also wanted to have a say in how the whole empire was ruled. The Hungarians had a choice. They could try to start another revolution, but they might lose again. If they won, their country would be small, with big, strong countries around it. Or they could stay with Austria but get the right to rule their own land and help rule the empire. The Hungarian leaders decided to talk with Austria. They agreed on something important in 1867. This agreement created the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was also called the Dual Monarchy. Now Austria and Hungary were equal parts of the empire. They were like two countries but with one ruler, Emperor Franz Joseph I. Each part, Austria and Hungary, had its own parliament. They could make laws for their own areas. But the army and talking with other countries were things the emperor did for the whole empire. This agreement brought a lot of peace and quiet back to the empire. It helped stop problems inside the country and made the empire stronger again for a time. 5. Good years, growing pains. After the agreement in 1827, the Austro-Hungarian Empire entered a new period, mostly a good time for money. The economy began to grow quite quickly. Money became better for many people across the empire, meaning they lived better. The economy grew very fast for many years, faster than many other countries at that time, making it one of the fastest-growing economies in Europe. Many people lived better lives than before. The empire's population grew a lot, becoming the third largest in Europe. There were more jobs available, and people generally had more food and goods, leading to better lives for large parts of the population. The empire built many factories and became more modern. It changed from a country mostly based on farming to one that also made many things using machines. It became a big maker and seller of machines, selling many to other countries. It also made and sold a lot of electrical equipment, becoming one of the main producers in the world. This work made Austria-Hungary an important player in the world economy and trade. But even with this strong growth, the empire was still not as modern or as rich as the most modern industrial countries in Western Europe, like Great Britain, France, or the new powerful country of Germany. And inside Austria-Hungary, the money and economic growth were not spread equally. Some areas grew much faster and became much richer than others. The Austrian part of the empire, especially around cities like Vienna and Prague, became very modern and wealthy by the early 200s. But the Hungarian part did not change as quickly. The rich and powerful people who owned land and had political control in Hungary did not want fast growth with factories. They liked their old way of life, which was based on owning land and farming. They were worried that building many factories and having new industries would bring big changes in how people lived and who had power. They feared that business owners, people who were not from the old noble families, would become rich and powerful. These new rich people might want political power, which the old rich families did not want to share. The Hungarian rulers wanted to keep control for themselves. They were also afraid that many workers in factories would start asking for better jobs, more money, and more rights in the government, which could challenge the power of the traditional rulers. Because of this resistance, the leaders in Hungary tried to slow down the building of factories and modern industries. This caused Austria and Hungary to develop in very different ways. Austria became more industrial and had more cities, with more factory workers, while Hungary remained mostly farming and rural, with power held by the landowners. These differences in how they made money and how people lived made the Austrian and Hungarian parts feel more separate. Their ways of life and their economies grew apart. So these years were good for the empire's economy and brought better lives for many people. But they also created bigger differences and problems between the two main parts. These growing pains showed that keeping Austria and Hungary together, while bringing peace, also created new challenges for the future of the empire. The lack of equal development and the resistance to change in some areas made the empire feel less like one united country over time. This divide would add to the difficulties the empire faced later. 6. Many peoples, one empire. The empire had many different groups of people living in it. The leaders tried to give these people rights to help keep the empire strong and stable. They saw that when Hungarians got more rights, the empire became calmer, so they thought giving more rights to others might help too. The empire gave legal recognition to minority languages. This meant people could use their own language in important places. For example, in schools, children could learn in their own language. In government offices, people could use their language to do business. Street names and public signs could be in different languages. A law in the Austrian part said that all groups had equal rights. It said everyone had a right to use their own language and keep their culture. Schools and public places should help people use their own language without making them learn another one. Some groups received special rights and could rule their own areas more. Croats, Slovenes, and Italians had their languages recognized. They could go to school and get papers in their language. They even had local parliaments with people from their own culture. It was also possible for people from minority groups to be elected to the main parliament in Hungary or Austria. The empire was also quite tolerant of Jewish people. At that time, it was seen as one of the most open places for Jewish people in the world. The leaders even thought about making the empire into 3 parts: Austria, Hungary, and a Croatian kingdom. This would have given the Croats the same status as Austria and Hungary, but ruling so many different groups was difficult. Each group had its own interests and ideas. Often, the goals of Austria and Hungary were not the same. This made it very hard for the empire to make important decisions or move forward together. Sometimes they could not agree on anything. The different areas of the empire also grew in different ways. The Austrian part became more industrial, with many factories. The Hungarian part mostly stayed focused on farming. Other areas, like the region that is now part of Poland or the Romanian region, were much poorer and struggled to develop. The main thing holding the empire together was the emperor. People in all parts accepted him as their ruler. But around this time, having one ruler like an emperor was becoming less common in the world. If people stopped believing in the emperor, there was not much else to keep all the different peoples together in one empire. 7. The Big War changes everything. The Big War started. It was called World War I. This war was very bad for Austria-Hungary. The country lost a lot of soldiers. Many men died, about 1 million. Many more were captured, about 1.5 million. The fighting was hard. The war also caused big problems at home. People did not have enough food. Many people were starving. Life was very difficult for everyone. People began to lose faith in the emperor and the government. He was the leader, but the country was losing the war. Every time they lost a battle, people trusted him less. Something important happened outside the empire. In 1917, there was a revolution in Russia. This greatly changed the power balance in Europe. Before this, countries like Britain and France were afraid of Russia getting too powerful in Eastern Europe. They saw Austria-Hungary as a country that could stop Russia from growing further west. It acted like a wall or a buffer between Russia and Western Europe. But after the Russian Revolution and the civil war that followed, Russia became weaker for a time. It was pushed back east. So Britain and France did not need Austria-Hungary to be a buffer anymore. They started to think about the future of the empire if they won the war. The Allied powers decided it would be better and easier for them to control several smaller countries instead of one large Austria-Hungary. It also helped them weaken Germany after the war, as Austria-Hungary was Germany's close friend and ally. Because of this decision, the Allied powers started to actively support groups inside the empire who wanted their own countries. This added to the growing chaos inside Austria-Hungary. The Austro-Hungarian military became weaker during the war. It started to depend more and more on its main ally, Germany. By May 1918, Austria-Hungary made an agreement with Germany. The Austro-Hungarian army would follow German command. The emperor was the supreme commander, but now Germany was taking the lead for his army. This weakened the emperor's position and seemed to remove a main reason for the empire to stay together. With serious problems inside the country, like hunger and loss of faith, and external support for independence, the empire faced huge challenges. Representatives from many minority groups met in Rome in April 1918. Many were not living in the empire at that time. These included people like Czechs, Poles and Serbs, Croats and Slovenes. At this meeting, they said that the people of Austria-Hungary who were not German or Hungarian would leave the empire. They would form their own independent nations. The Allied powers supported this. From then on, their goal was to help create new countries like Czechoslovakia and a country for Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Austria-Hungary tried to find ways to keep the empire together, like offering more power to different regions within the empire. but these plans did not work. The countries outside the empire did not want a powerful country in Central Europe. By this time, Austria-Hungary was too weak to make its own decisions if the stronger countries of Europe were against it. The big war had changed everything, setting the stage for the empire's end. 8. The empire falls apart. The leaders of the empire tried very hard one last time to keep it together. They thought of a new plan to make the empire like a group of states, each with its own government but still linked together. They even had a name idea, the United States of the Danube. This plan would give more power to the different regions inside the empire. But this idea did not work. Countries outside the empire that had won the war did not want a strong country in Central Europe. They wanted the empire to break up into many smaller countries that would be easier to influence. They also supported the different ethnic groups inside the empire who now strongly wanted to be independent. Inside the empire, the desire for full independence was too strong. The empire had already given regions like Croatia and others some power and their own local governments in the past. This meant these regions already had leaders and structures ready to take control. This made it easier for them to declare independence. Starting in October, different parts of the empire began to leave. On October 21st, Austria said it was an independent country and would no longer rule an empire. On October 28th, Czechoslovakia declared its independence. On the same day, the region of Galicia decided to join Poland. On October 29th, people in Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina announced they were forming their own state and would join with Serbia and Montenegro. On November 1st, Hungary declared itself an independent country. Later, some territories in the south joined Romania. The end of the empire was mostly peaceful. Emperor Karl, the ruler, did not try to use the army to stop the breakup. On November 11th, the government in Austria told the emperor he no longer had power. He accepted this and stepped away. The two main parts, Austria and Hungary, formally separated and became independent nations. The dual monarchy of 1867 was over. The new borders between the countries caused serious problems for the economy. Businesses that used to sell goods across the empire or get materials from different regions now found it hard because of new borders and rules. This caused economic difficulties in the new countries. The new countries often used the idea of nationalism. They said their country belonged to one main ethnic group. But many of the new countries still had large groups of other ethnicities living within their borders, just like the old empire. For example, the new country of Czechoslovakia had both Czech and Slovak people, plus Germans and Hungarians. So the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was not just because it lost a war or had many ethnic groups. These were factors, but the fact that regions already had some power to govern themselves, the strong desire for independence, and the actions of other powerful countries were also very important reasons for the empire's collapse. It was a complex mix of problems. Do you think the Austro-Hungarian Empire could have survived if World War I had not happened, or was its breakup always going to happen?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.